The darkness tasted like copper and regret. Elena Mercer sat alone in the corner of the wooden house, her back pressed against rough timber that still held the day's heat. Outside, the Texas wind moved through the mesquite trees with a sound like whispered warnings. The single candle on the table created more shadows than light, and in those shadows, memory and fear danced together like old enemies who knew each other's steps too well. Her fingers trembled against the cold metal of the Colt revolver in her lap. 29 years old, and she could not remember 27 of them. The gun felt foreign in her hands. 3 weeks ago, she had never held one. 3 weeks ago, she had been a seamstress who kept her head down and her past buried under 18 months of careful silence. 3 weeks ago, she had believed she could outrun the truth. The candle flame bent sideways in a draft that came from nowhere. Elena watched the smoke curl upward, dissolving into nothing, and thought about how easily a life could vanish, how a woman could wake up on a train with blood in her hair and no name in her memory, how she could build a quiet existence from the scraps of forgetting only to have it shattered by a single word whispered in violence. Catherine. That name echoed in the empty spaces of her mind like a stone dropped into a well. She could hear it falling, 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 but never quite hitting bottom. Someone had called her that. Someone who wanted her dead had recognized a ghost. They asked me if I remember who I was before she thought staring into the flame. I tell them no. That is half true. The other half was buried in West Texas dirt along with the woman she might have been. 3 weeks earlier, the world had been simpler. September in Stillwater, Texas, arrived like a promise that would not be kept. The heat pressed down on the town with patient malice, baking the wooden boardwalks until they groaned with every footstep, turning the main street into a ribbon of dust that hung in the air long after the horses passed. The sun bleached everything the same exhausted brown, as if color itself had given up trying to survive here. Elena had learned to move through this heat like a shadow. Invisible, unremarkable, a woman who made dresses for the wives of men who never looked at her twice. That was exactly how she wanted it. She had been working at Edith Monroe's fabric shop for 18 months, ever since she had stepped off the evening train with nothing but the clothes on her back and a story she had practiced until it sounded almost true. A widow from Louisiana, husband dead from yellow fever, looking for a fresh start in a place where no one asked too many questions. Stillwater was perfect for that. It was a town that minded its own business mainly because everyone had something they preferred to keep buried. The dust was good at covering things up. The shop sat on 3rd Street, wedged between the general store and a boarding house that smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and regret. Elena spent her days in the back room, needle and thread, moving in rhythms she did not remember learning, but her fingers somehow knew. Sometimes she would pause mid-stitch and wonder whose hands these really were. What had they done before they forgot Edith Monroe was a practical woman in her 50s who asked few questions and expected even fewer answers. She paid Elena a fair wage, let her rent the small room above the shop, and maintained a comfortable distance that suited them both. In 18 months, they had never shared a meal or a confidence. It was the best working relationship Elena had ever known, as far as her fractured memory could confirm. The morning of September 14th started like any other. Elena woke before dawn, washed her face in the basin by the window, braided her dark hair with fingers that worked automatically while her mind drifted elsewhere. She had learned not to chase the fragments of memory that sometimes surfaced. They were like fish in murky water. The harder you grasped, the faster they slipped away. She was pinning a hem on Mrs. Crawford's church dress when Edith came to the doorway, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. "Elena, I need you to run to the general store. We are nearly out of black thread, and Lord knows I will need it for the funeral orders." Someone died. Old Mr. Peterson. Finally? Edith said it without malice, just the flat acceptance of a woman who had seen too many people come and go to pretend each departure was a tragedy. "His daughters will want mourning dresses by Sunday." Elena set down the dress and reached for her shawl, though the heat outside made it unnecessary. Old habits. She had learned to keep herself covered, keep herself small, keep herself forgotten. The walk to the general store took her past the Lucky Diamond Saloon, Clayton Voss's establishment. She always crossed to the other side of the street when she approached it, not because Voss had ever bothered her directly, but because of the way his eyes followed certain women, like he was making calculations, like he was deciding whether they were worth the trouble of acquiring. Elena had been in Stillwater 6 months before she even learned Voss's name. He was the kind of man who owned things, the saloon, the boarding house, half the buildings on Main Street. And he wore his ownership like other men wore, their guns always visible, always ready. She kept her head down as she passed, but she could feel the weight of observation from the saloon's windows. Someone was always watching in Stillwater. That was the price of calling this place home. The general store was busy with the usual morning crowd, cowboys buying tobacco, housewives examining fabric, old men who came more for the conversation than the commerce. Elena made her purchase quickly, exchanging the minimum pleasantries required by small-town courtesy, and left before anyone could ask her the questions she had learned to deflect. How long are you staying? Do you have family? Why did you really come here? She was halfway back to the shop when she saw him, Clayton Voss, standing in the alley beside the land office, deep in conversation with 2 men she did not recognize. Their horses were tied nearby saddlebags, heavy with something that made the animals shift nervously. Voss was gesturing with his hands, his voice low but urgent. Even from across the street, Elena could read the tension in his shoulders. She should have kept walking, should have delivered the thread to Edith and returned to the safe monotony of her needle and cloth, should have remembered that curiosity was a luxury she could not afford. But something made her pause, some instinct she did not remember acquiring. One of the men handed Voss a leather satchel, old and worn, the kind that looked like it had traveled through harder country than this. Voss opened it, looked inside, then closed it quickly. His face, usually so controlled, showed something Elena had never seen there before. Fear. He said something sharp to the men who mounted their horses and rode out of town, heading north, at a pace that suggested they did not plan on coming back. Voss stood there for a long moment, clutching the satchel like it might try to escape, looking up and down the street to see if anyone had noticed. His eyes found Elena's. The moment stretched too long. She saw recognition flicker across his face, then something else. Confusion maybe, or memory trying to surface. His mouth opened as if to call out to her. Elena turned and walked away, her heart hammering against her ribs in a rhythm that felt like warning drums. Do not run. Do not draw attention. Just move with purpose and disappear into the normal flow of the day. She made it back to the shop, handed Edith the thread with shaking hands, and retreated to her room, claiming a headache. For the rest of the afternoon she sat by the window watching the street below, waiting for Voss to appear at the door with questions she could not answer. He never came. But that night, unable to sleep, Elena made a decision that would unmake everything she had so carefully constructed. She followed him. The moon was 3/4 full, bright enough to cast hard shadows across the desert landscape. Elena kept her distance, moving between the scattered buildings at the edge of town, watching as Clayton Voss rode out toward the empty country to the west. He had the satchel tied to his saddle, and he rode like a man with a purpose he did not want observed. She should not have followed. Every instinct that had kept her alive for 18 months screamed at her to turn back, to forget whatever she had seen, to remember that survival meant not asking questions. But something deeper pulled her forward. Some part of her that existed before the forgetting, before the train, before the careful construction of Elena Mercer. That part of her needed to know. Voss stopped about 2 miles out in a hollow between 3 large rocks that formed a natural shelter from the wind and from the sight of anyone passing on the main road. He dismounted, took a shovel from his saddle, and began to dig. Elena crouched behind a stand of creosote bushes 40 yards away, her dress collecting burrs, and her knees aching against the hard ground. The night air smelled of sage, and something mineral like the earth itself was sweating metal. She watched Voss dig for 20 minutes, the rhythm of his work steady and mechanical. He was burying something he needed to hide. When the hole was deep enough, he lowered the satchel into it with almost reverent care. Even from this distance, Elena could see his hands shaking. He covered it quickly, then spent several minutes arranging rocks over the disturbed earth, making it look natural, making it disappear. He stood there for a moment looking down at his work, his shoulders rising and falling with heavy breaths. Then he mounted his horse and rode back toward town. Elena waited until she could no longer hear the hoofbeats before she moved. Her legs had cramped from crouching so long, and she nearly fell as she stood. The moon watched her with its cold white eye as she approached the burial site, as if daring her to dig up what Voss had buried. She did not have a shovel. But she had hands, and she had questions, and 18 months of not knowing who she was had built up a hunger for truth that outweighed caution. The earth was still loose. It came away easily under her fingers, dirt collecting under her nails, her dress getting filthy in ways that Edith would notice and wonder about. But Elena kept digging, kept pulling away the layers of concealment until her fingers hit leather. The satchel was heavier than it looked. She pulled it free, brushed off the dirt, and opened the brass clasp with trembling hands. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were two things: a journal, old and water-stained, filled with handwriting she did not recognize, and a locket silver and tarnished with a photograph inside. A woman's face stared back at her, young, perhaps 25, with delicate features and eyes that held some deep sadness. Beautiful in the way that makes men write poetry, and other women check their own reflections with quiet despair. Elena had never seen her before, but something about that face pulled at the blank spaces in her memory like a hand reaching through fog. She closed the locket, wrapped everything back in the oilcloth, and took the satchel. She would examine it properly back in her room where she had light and time and distance from whatever made Clayton Voss afraid. She buried the hole again, tried to arrange the rocks the way Voss had, and walked back toward a town, carrying secrets that did not belong to her. She made it halfway back before she heard the horse behind her. "Going somewhere, Miss Mercer?" Voss's voice cut through the night like a blade drawn from a sheath. Elena froze, her fingers tightening on the satchel. "Do not run," she told herself. "Running is confession." She turned slowly. Voss sat on his horse 20 feet away, close enough that she could see his face in the moonlight, close enough that she could see the gun in his hand. "Mr. Voss, I was just taking a walk, could not sleep. 2 miles out of town, in the dark, carrying something that belongs to me." His voice was calm, which made it more terrifying than anger would have been. This was a man who had done violence before and would do it again without the inconvenience of emotion. "I saw you bury it. I was curious." "Curious." He repeated the word like he was tasting it for poison. "Curiosity is a dangerous thing for a woman with no past, Miss Mercer, or should I say Miss Catherine." The name hit her like a physical blow. Her vision swam for a moment, and she had to lock her knees to keep from falling. Catherine, the name from the forgetting, the name that lived in the spaces where her memory should be. "I do not know what you mean." "Do not you?" Voss dismounted, keeping the gun trained on her as he walked closer. "I thought I recognized you in town today, something about your eyes. But I told myself no, it could not be. Catherine Mercer died in a fire 2 years ago. Everyone knows that." Elena's mouth had gone dry. Fire. The word pulled at something deep in her mind. Smoke. Screaming. The smell of burning fabric and hair. "You have me confused with someone else. Maybe?" Voss was close now, close enough that she could smell whiskey on his breath. "Or maybe you are exactly who I think you are. Either way, you have something that belongs to me." He reached for the satchel. Elena pulled it back. "What is in here that is worth killing for Mr. Voss?" His face changed. The mask of civility fell away, and beneath it was something cold and reptilian. "You should not have followed me. You should have stayed in your little room and your little life, and kept your head down like you have been doing." His hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, squeezing until she gasped. "But you just could not help yourself, could you, Catherine? Always had to know, always had to interfere." "I am not Catherine," she said through gritted teeth. "Then you will not mind dying like her." He yanked the satchel from her hands and backhanded her across the face. Elena fell, tasting blood, the desert spinning around her. She tried to stand, and he kicked her in the ribs. Air left her lungs in a rush. She curled up, trying to protect herself, and he kicked her again. "I should have made sure you were dead the first time." Voss said, his voice still calm, still reasonable. That was my mistake, but I learn from my errors. He dragged her upright, his fingers digging into her arm hard enough to leave bruises. Elena fought, clawing at his face, but he was stronger, and he had done this before. He had the casual efficiency of a man who knew how to hurt women. He started dragging her toward town, not to help her. She knew that with a certainty that came from somewhere deeper than thought, he was going to make a spectacle of it. The walk back to Stillwater took 20 minutes. Elena's face was swelling, blood running from her split lip, her ribs screaming with every breath. Voss held her upright with one hand, the satchel in the other, and he walked like a man without a care in the world. When they reached Main Street, he threw her down in the middle of the road, right in front of the Lucky Diamond Saloon. It was late past midnight, but there were still men inside drinking, still people awake. Voss wanted an audience. He opened the saloon doors and called out, "Gentlemen, come see what I found, a thief, a liar, a woman who thought she could steal from me and get away with it." Men stumbled out, curious and drunk and looking for entertainment. Within minutes, a crowd had gathered. Elena tried to stand, and Voss kicked her down again. "This woman," he announced to the growing assembly, his voice carrying across the silent street, "broke into my property, stole from me. When I confronted her, she attacked me." It was all lies, but lies delivered with such confidence that they became truth in the minds of men who wanted to believe them, men who needed to believe that women who got hurt had done something to deserve it. Elena looked at the faces surrounding her, faces she recognized, men who bought fabric from Edith's shop, women she had made dresses for, the baker, the blacksmith, the banker. All of them watching as Clayton Voss prepared to destroy her, and not one of them moving to intervene. The quiet of complicity was as brutal as any fist. Voss crouched down beside her, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "You should have stayed dead, Catherine." Then he stood and kicked her again, this time in the face. The world went red, then black, then red again. Elena felt her consciousness slipping away like water through cupped hands. This is it, she thought. This is how it ends. Dying in the street of a town that does not know my name, killed by a man for reasons I cannot remember. She had survived the fire and the forgetting and 18 months of careful invisibility, only to die here in the dust alone. Somewhere far away, she heard a new voice, deep, calm, cutting through the night like a clean blade. "That is enough." Elena forced her eyes open, though the left one had swollen nearly shut. Through the haze of pain and blood, she saw him. A man on horseback sitting perfectly still at the edge of the crowd. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing clothes that had seen hard country and harder weather. His hat sat low on his brow, casting his face in shadow, but she could see his eyes. His eyes were pale and hard, the color of flint. He was looking at Clayton Voss the way a man might look at something that needed killing. Voss turned, and Elena saw his expression shift. Irritation gave way to something more careful, more calculated. He knew this man. "This is none of your concern, Rowan." Rowan. The name meant nothing to Elena, but it clearly meant something to Clayton Voss and to the crowd. She felt the quality of the silence change, fear replacing indifference. "Seems like it is my concern." The man called Rowan did not raise his voice, but somehow it carried anyway. "Seems like you are beating a woman in the street and calling it justice. She is a thief, I have every right. To what, kick her to death while grown men stand around watching?" Rowan's hand rested on his saddle, casual, but Elena noticed how close it was to the gun at his hip. "That is not justice. That is murder. You do not know what you are talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about." Rowan dismounted in one smooth motion, landing light despite his size. "I have been watching you for 2 months, Voss, watching you and your business and the way you treat anyone who gets in your way. So, yes, this is my concern." "Who are you?" Voss's hand had drifted toward his own gun. "Some hired gun, someone with a grudge." "My name is Caleb Rowan. I am a private investigator from Kansas City, and I was hired by the Hartwell family to look into the death of Grace Hartwell Voss." The name hit the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Elena saw ripples of recognition, of memory, of things people did not want to talk about. Grace Hartwell Voss. Who was she? Voss's face had gone pale. "My wife died in an accident 2 years ago. There is nothing to investigate." "The Hartwell family disagrees. So do I." Caleb took 2 steps forward, putting himself between Voss and Elena. "So here is what is going to happen. You are going to step back, and I am going to take this woman somewhere she can heal. And then we are all going to have a long conversation about what really happened to Grace. She was helping the woman who stole from me." "What did she steal?" Voss hesitated. Just for a second, but long enough for everyone to notice. "Papers, documents, private property." "Private enough that you buried them in the desert at midnight." Caleb's voice had taken on an edge. "Private enough that you are willing to beat a woman to death to keep them hidden." The crowd murmured, doubt spreading like cracks in glass. Voss saw he was losing control of the narrative. His hand moved toward his gun. Caleb was faster. His revolver cleared leather in a blur leveled at Voss's chest before the other man's fingers even touched metal. "Do not." One word, flat, final. Voss froze. "I am taking her," Caleb said. "If you want to stop me, draw your gun. But understand that I have killed before, and I will not lose sleep over adding you to the count." For a long moment, nobody moved. The whole town seemed to be holding its breath. Then Voss stepped back, his hands rising slowly away from his weapon. "She is yours then, your problem. Do not come crying when she robs you blind." "I will take my chances." Caleb holstered his gun and knelt beside Elena. Up close she could see his face clearly for the first time. Late 30s, weathered by sun and wind, a scar running from his left eyebrow into his hairline. His jaw was dark with several days of stubble, but his eyes, when they met hers, held something unexpected. Not pity, something harder than that. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. "Can you hear me?" he asked quietly. Elena managed a small nod, the movement sending fresh spikes of pain through her skull. "Good. I am going to get you out of here. Can you stand?" She tried. Failed. Her legs had stopped obeying somewhere around the third kick to her ribs. "All right. I am going to carry you. It is going to hurt, but I need you to stay quiet. Can you do that?" Another nod. Caleb slipped one arm under her shoulders, the other beneath her knees, and lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. The movement made her gasp, made black spots dance across her vision, but she bit down on her lip and stayed silent. He carried her to his horse, a big bay gelding that stood perfectly still as Caleb settled Elena in the saddle, then swung up behind her. His arm came around her waist, holding her steady against his chest, and she felt the solid warmth of him at her back. For the first time in 18 months, since waking on that train with blood in her hair and emptiness in her mind, Elena felt something she had almost forgotten: safe. Caleb turned the horse away from the crowd, away from Clayton Voss's cold rage, away from a town that had stood and watched her die. "Where are you taking me?" she managed to whisper. "My ranch. Broken Creek, about 30 miles north. You can rest there, heal. And then we are going to talk about Grace Hartwell and what you know about her death." "I do not know anything about anyone's death. Maybe you do not remember, but Clayton Voss remembers you, called you Catherine." Caleb's voice was quiet, almost gentle, "and that name means something, something worth killing for." Elena wanted to argue, wanted to insist he was wrong, but exhaustion and pain were pulling her down into darkness. Her head lolled back against his shoulder. "Who was Grace Hartwell?" she asked, the words coming out slurred. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight of old grief. "My sister. And I think you knew her. I think you knew her very well." Then Elena let go, let the darkness take her, and dreamed of fire. The ride passed in fragments. Elena surfaced occasionally, aware of motion and pain, and the steady rhythm of the horse's gait. Once she woke enough to realize the sun had risen, that they were climbing into rougher country where the air smelled different. Cleaner somehow, less like dust, and more like something green fighting to survive. Another time she felt water against her lips and drank without opening her eyes, trusting the hand that held the canteen. Mostly she just hurt. Her face throbbed where Voss had hit her. Her ribs screamed with every breath. And beneath it all ran a deeper pain, the kind that had nothing to do with fists or boots, the pain of knowing she had been alone in that street, that a whole town had watched and not one person had cared enough to intervene, except this stranger. This man who claimed her past was tangled up with his dead sister. When they finally stopped, Elena forced her eyes open and saw a house. Simple, sturdy, built from rough-cut timber, with a wide porch and a stone chimney. Beyond it, a small barn and a corral holding 3 horses. The bones of a working ranch, though one that looked like it had seen better days. "Almost there," Caleb said, his voice a low rumble against her back. "Just a little further." He dismounted and lifted her down with the same careful strength he had shown in Stillwater. Elena tried to stand, but her legs buckled. He caught her easily. "Easy. You have got broken ribs at least, maybe worse. Let me do the work." He carried her into the house and through a main room that served as kitchen and living space combined. The furniture was plain but well made. Everything was clean but spare, like a place where someone lived but did not quite inhabit. He laid her on a narrow bed in a small room off the main space and lit a lamp against the gathering dusk. "I am going to check your injuries," he said. "Some of them need tending. I will be as gentle as I can, but it is going to hurt." "Already hurts," Elena managed. "I know. I'm sorry." He pulled a chair next to the bed and began carefully examining her face. His hands were rough with calluses, but gentle in their touch. His expression remained neutral as he catalogued the damage. "Broken cheekbone, maybe. Your eye is swollen shut, but I do not think there is permanent damage. Split lip will heal on its own." He moved his attention lower carefully, probing through her dress at the places where Voss's boots had connected. "Ribs are the bigger problem. At least 2 broken, maybe 3. Nothing I can do about those except wrap them tight and tell you not to move much for the next few weeks." He stood and crossed to a cabinet, returning with clean cloth, a basin of water, and a bottle of whiskey. "This is going to hurt worse, but we need to get you cleaned up and those ribs wrapped." For the next hour, Elena existed in a haze of pain. Caleb worked with methodical efficiency, cleaning her wounds, wrapping her ribs, tending to every injury with practiced ease. He offered her the whiskey twice, and both times she drank coughing at the burn. When he was finally done, he covered her with a blanket and stood looking down at her. "You should sleep. Tomorrow is going to be hard. You will need your strength." "Why are you doing this?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "You do not know me." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried certainty and sadness in equal measure. "Grace was my half-sister. We had the same father, different mothers. I only met her once when she was 16 before she married Voss. When she died, her family hired me to investigate because the local law would not." He sat back down in the chair. "I have been following leads for 6 months, and every lead points back to you. Catherine Eleanor Mercer, the woman who was Grace's closest friend. The woman who supposedly died in the same fire that killed her." "I am not Catherine. I am Elena. I do not remember anything before waking up on a train 18 months ago." "Maybe you do not. But Voss remembered you, and that journal he buried, the one you dug up that belonged to Grace. She wrote about you, about secrets you shared, about something that got her killed." He leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. "So whether you remember or not, you are part of this, and I need you alive to find the truth." Elena wanted to protest, to insist he was wrong, but exhaustion was pulling her down. "Get some rest," Caleb said, standing. "We will talk more tomorrow." He left the room, closing the door softly behind him. Elena lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling around her. Somewhere outside, a horse nickered. Wind sighed through the eaves, and in the main room she could hear the creak of a chair as Caleb sat down, keeping watch. She should have been afraid, should have questioned his motives, doubted his story, prepared herself to run at the first opportunity. But she was too tired for fear, too broken for doubt. So instead she let herself drift toward sleep, her mind turning over the fragments of the day like stones in a river looking for patterns in the chaos. Catherine Eleanor Mercer, Grace Hartwell, a fire, a death. Secrets worth killing for. And somewhere in the blank spaces of her memory the truth was waiting. Just before sleep took her completely, one more thought surfaced. The photograph in the locket, the woman's face. Why had it felt so familiar? Elena's eyes flew open in the darkness, her heart suddenly racing. Because she had seen that face before, not in a locket, in a mirror, when she was someone else, when she was Catherine. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like a key turning in a lock she had not known was there. Somewhere deep in the forgetting, a door was beginning to open, and on the other side she could smell smoke. Morning came with birdsong and the smell of coffee. Elena woke slowly, swimming up through layers of pain and confusion toward consciousness. For a moment she could not remember where she was or how she had gotten there. Then it came back in fragments. The beating, the stranger, the ride through darkness, and that final realization before sleep had claimed her. The woman in the locket had been her. She forced her eyes open, both of them this time, though the left was still swollen, nearly shut. Pale sunlight filtered through simple curtains, illuminating a small bedroom with whitewashed walls and plain wooden furniture. Someone had left a glass of water on the table beside the bed, along with a clean dress that was not hers. The door stood open, and through it she could see into the main room where Caleb Rowan stood at the stove, his back to her, cooking something that made her stomach clench with sudden hunger despite the pain. She tried to sit up. Every muscle in her body screamed protest. Her ribs felt like they had been replaced with broken glass, and her face throbbed with each heartbeat. But she needed answers more than she needed comfort. "Easy," Caleb's voice came without him turning around. "Those ribs need time. You move too fast, you will tear something loose." "How did you know I was awake?" "Your breathing changed." He turned then, a spatula in his hand, his gray eyes assessing her with the same careful attention he had given her injuries the night before. "How do you feel?" "Like I was beaten in the street." Something that might have been a smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Honest. That is good. Means your spirit is not broken." He returned to the stove. "Can you stand? There is a privy out back. I will help you if you need it." The thought of him helping her with such intimate necessities made her face burn, but pride was a luxury she could not afford. She needed to move, needed to see if her body still worked the way it should. She pushed the blanket aside and swung her legs over the edge of the bed. The room tilted dangerously. Caleb was beside her in 3 quick strides, his hand steady on her shoulder. "Slow. Let your body catch up with your intentions." Together, they made the agonizing journey outside to the small building behind the house. He waited at a respectful distance, his gaze fixed on the horizon, giving her what privacy he could. When she emerged, leaning heavily against the doorframe, he was there again, supporting most of her weight as they walked back inside. He settled her into a chair at the kitchen table and brought her a plate of eggs and bacon along with strong black coffee. She ate slowly, each bite an exercise in pain management, but the food was good and she was hungrier than she had realized. "The dress," she said between bites, her voice still rough. "Where did it come from?" "I bought it in town last month. Thought you might need clean clothes when you woke up." He paused. "Your own dress was beyond saving. Too much blood." Elena looked down at the simple cotton fabric she still wore from yesterday, now stiff with dried blood and desert dirt. The sight of it brought everything back. Voss's fists, his boot connecting with her ribs, the way the town had watched. "You said Grace was your sister." "Half-sister." Caleb sat down across from her, his coffee cup cradled in both hands. "Same father, different mothers. My mother was his first wife, lived in Kansas. Grace's mother was his mistress in Louisiana. He kept 2 families for 20 years. Neither woman knew about the other until after he died." "How did you meet Grace?" "At the reading of his will. She was 16, I was 27. We talked for maybe an hour total, but I could see she was good, you know. Kind in a way that does not survive long in hard country." His jaw tightened. 2 years later, she married Clayton Voss. Her mother pushed for it. Voss had money status. Never mind that he was twice Grace's age and mean as a rattlesnake. When did she die? September 1869, 7 years after her marriage. Official story was she fell from her horse, broke her neck. But her family did not believe it. Neither did I. He looked at Elena directly. "I have been investigating for 6 months. Every piece of evidence I find points back to you." Elena's hands had started shaking. She set down her coffee cup before she could spill it. "I told you, I do not remember anything before the train, before 18 months ago." "Then let me help you remember." Caleb stood and retrieved something from a shelf near the window, a leather folder worn and water-stained. He opened it on the table between them. Inside were documents, newspaper clippings, letters, and photographs. The first photograph showed Grace Hartwell on her wedding day standing next to Clayton Voss. She wore white lace and a smile that did not reach her eyes. Voss stood beside her like a man displaying a prize he had won. The second photograph made Elena's breath catch. Two young women, perhaps 23 or 24 years old, standing in front of a house with their arms around each other's shoulders, both smiling, both alive with the kind of joy that comes before the world teaches you to be careful with your happiness. One of them was Grace Hartwell. The other was Elena, or rather the woman Elena had been before the forgetting. Catherine. That was taken in New Orleans, 1867, Caleb said quietly. According to the letters, I found you and Grace met when you both worked at the same boarding house. You became close friends. When Grace's mother forced her to marry Voss and moved to Texas, you came with her. Elena stared at the photograph at the face that was hers, but belonged to someone else. Catherine's eyes held something Elena's did not. Confidence, maybe, or certainty, the knowledge of who she was and where she belonged. I do not remember her, Elena whispered. I do not remember any of this. Maybe not consciously, but Voss remembered you, called you Catherine without hesitation. Caleb pulled out another document, a letter written in elegant script. This is from Grace to her mother, dated June 1869, 3 months before she died. Listen to this. He read aloud, his voice taking on the cadence of the words on the page. Dearest Mother, I fear I have made a terrible mistake in marrying Clayton. He is not the man he pretended to be. His business dealings are not merely questionable, they are criminal. And when I questioned him about certain discrepancies in his accounts, he became violent. Catherine witnessed the incident and urged me to leave him, but I am afraid of what he might do, afraid of the scandal. Catherine says she has kept records evidence of his crimes in case we ever need protection. She is braver than I am. I pray her courage does not get her killed. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. Elena's mind was racing, trying to fit these pieces into the vast emptiness of her memory. Grace, New Orleans, evidence of crimes. It should have meant something, should have sparked recognition, but there was only blank space and the growing sense of dread. What crimes? She asked. That is what I have been trying to figure out. Voss owns half of Stillwater now, but 6 years ago he had almost nothing. Something happened between 1865 and 1870 that made him very rich, very fast. Caleb's eyes were intense. And I think you and Grace knew what it was. Before Elena could respond, there was a knock at the door. Both of them froze. Caleb's hand went to the gun at his hip, and Elena saw his whole body shift into readiness. He moved to the window, looked out carefully, and his expression changed to something between surprise and confusion. It is a woman, young, wearing mourning clothes. He looked at Elena. You expecting anyone? I do not even know where I am. Caleb opened the door slowly, keeping his body between Elena and whoever stood outside. Can I help you, miss? A voice Elena did not recognize, soft and cultured with the accent of old Southern money. Mr. Rowan, my name is Sarah Voss. I need to speak with Catherine Mercer. I know she is here. Elena's heart lurched. Voss's daughter. Had he sent her? Was this a trap? But Caleb stepped aside, and the woman who entered was nothing like Elena had expected. Sarah Voss was perhaps 23 years old, slender and pale, with dark hair pinned severely back from a face that might have been beautiful if it were not so haunted. She wore black from head to toe, a widow's weeds, though Elena knew she was not married. Her hands twisted together nervously as her eyes found Elena at the table. Mrs. Mercer, thank God. I was so afraid I would not find you in time. In time for what? Caleb's hand was still on his gun. Before my father kills you both. Sarah's voice trembled. He is gathering men. I heard him last night making plans. He knows you are here, Mr. Rowan, and he knows you have her. How did you find us? I followed you yesterday, watched from the rocks when you rode out of town. I waited until dark and then came. She took a step closer to Elena. Please. You do not remember me, but I remember you. You used to read to me when I was little, before my mother died, before everything went wrong." Elena stared at this young woman who claimed to know her, searching for any flicker of recognition. Nothing, just more emptiness where memory should be. "I do not remember," she said, and hated how weak her voice sounded. "I know. That is what Dr. Pritchard said, that you would not remember, that it was the only way you would survive." Sarah reached into her cloak and pulled out something wrapped in oilcloth. "But I have something that might help. I went back to the place where Father buried the satchel. I dug it up again before he could move it." She unwrapped the oilcloth to reveal the journal Elena had seen the night before and the silver locket. But there was something else now, a folded piece of paper yellowed with age. Sarah unfolded it carefully. It was a hand-drawn map. "My mother drew this 2 days before she died. I found it hidden in her Bible. She wrote one word on the back." Sarah turned the paper over. Written in faded ink was a single word: Catherine. Elena took the map with shaking hands. It showed a route leading west from Stillwater into the desert country, ending at a location marked with an X. Beside the X, in Grace's handwriting, were the words, "Devil's Cradle." "What is Devil's Cradle?" Caleb asked. "A canyon in the hills about 50 miles west. There are old silver mines there, abandoned since before the war." Sarah's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "But one of them is not abandoned. My mother inherited it from her father. It was the only thing she owned that my father could not touch because it was held in trust. The deed was in her name alone." Understanding was beginning to dawn on Caleb's face. Voss wanted the mine. He wanted everything my mother had. Her money, her property, her dignity. When she would not tell him where the mine was or give him the deed, Sarah's voice broke. "He hurt her. And when Catherine tried to stop him, when she threatened to go to the authorities with evidence of his other crimes, he killed them both." Caleb finished softly. "He tried to." Sarah looked at Elena. "But Dr. Pritchard saved you, pulled you from the burning house, treated your wounds. You had been hit in the head so hard, he said you might never wake up. And when you did not remember anything. Not your name, not Grace, not what had happened." Elena's head was spinning. Fire. The memory that kept surfacing in nightmares. The smell of smoke. The sound of screaming. It was not just a dream. It was the truth trying to break through. "Dr. Pritchard told my father you were dead. Helped you get on a train headed east with a new name. He said it was the only way to keep you safe, to let you live." Sarah wiped at her eyes. "He died 6 months ago. Pneumonia, the doctor said. But I think my father poisoned him. He was afraid the doctor would talk." Caleb had gone very still, his mind clearly working through the implications. "If the mine is in Grace's name, and Grace is dead, who inherits it?" Sarah's smile was bitter. "I do, as her only child. And when I turn 25 next year, the trust dissolves, and I get full control. My father has been trying to force me to sign it over to him. That is why I am locked in the house most days, why he is trying to arrange a marriage for me to his business partner, a man who has agreed to give my father the mine as part of the dowry." "Why come to us?" Elena asked. "Why not go to the law?" "Because the law is my father's, the sheriff, the judge, the federal marshal. He owns them all." Sarah's hands clenched into fists. "The only thing he cannot control is the deed itself. It is hidden. My mother told Catherine where it was the night before she died, and I think she made a map so Catherine would not forget." She gestured to the paper in Elena's hands. "That is not just a map to the mine. It is a map to the proof that my father murdered my mother. The real deed is there along with documents showing how my father has been stealing from the trust for 2 years. If we can get those documents, we can destroy him." Caleb was looking at Elena, a question in his eyes. She knew what he was asking. Did she remember? Did any of this spark recognition? She looked down at the map again, at Grace's careful handwriting, at the route marked out in faded ink. And something did stir in the blank spaces, not memory exactly, but a sense of knowing. Her fingers traced the path to Devil's Cradle as if they had done this before. "There is something else," Sarah said quietly. She opened the journal and turned to a page near the end. "My mother's last entry, written the night she died." She handed it to Elena, who read the words written in increasingly frantic script. "He knows about the mine. He knows Catherine has been keeping records. I tried to warn her, but she would not leave me. She is too loyal, too brave. If something happens to me, I have told her where to find everything. The deed, the evidence, all of it hidden in the old mine at Devil's Cradle. She promised she would get it to the authorities. She promised she would make sure Sarah was safe. I believe her. Catherine is the bravest person I know. I only pray her courage does not get her killed. If you are reading this, my darling daughter, know that I loved you. Know that Catherine will protect you. Trust her as I have trusted her. She is the only one who knows the truth. The entry ended there mid-page as if Grace had been interrupted. Elena's throat was tight, tears burning in her eyes, though she did not know if they were for Grace or for the woman she had been. The woman who had made promises she could not remember keeping. I failed her, she whispered. I failed both of you. You survived, Caleb said firmly. That is not failure. That is the only thing you could do. But I left Sarah alone with him. I forgot everything. I ran. You did not run. You were dying. Sarah's voice was gentle despite her own pain. And you are here now. That is what matters. A long silence fell over the room, broken only by the sound of wind through the eaves and the distant call of a hawk. Finally, Caleb spoke. What do you want to do? The question was directed at Elena, and she understood what he was really asking. They could run, take Sarah and disappear into Mexico or California or anywhere Voss's reach did not extend. They could let the past stay buried and build new lives from the ashes of the old ones, or they could fight, could ride to Devil's Cradle and retrieve the evidence, could try to bring Clayton Voss to justice for what he had done. One path was safe. The other was likely to get them all killed. Elena looked at Sarah, at the young woman who had lost her mother and spent 2 years trapped in a house with her killer. She looked at Caleb, who had spent 6 months chasing a ghost because he could not save his sister when it mattered. And she thought about Catherine, the woman she had been, the woman who had been brave enough to stand up to a monster, even knowing what it might cost. Maybe she did not remember being Catherine, but she could honor what Catherine had tried to do. We get the deed, she said. We find the evidence. We make Voss answer for what he did. Caleb nodded slowly, respect in his eyes. It will be dangerous. Everything worth doing is. Sarah let out a shaky breath that might have been relief or fear or both. Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on her, on us. Your mother trusted me, Elena said. Even if I do not remember it, I will not betray that trust again. They spent the rest of the morning planning. Caleb brought out maps of the territory, and Sarah added details about the route to Devil's Cradle. It was 3 days' hard ride through country that offered little water and less shelter. They would need to move fast and careful. Voss will send men after us, Caleb said. He knows I am investigating, and now that Sarah is gone, he will know she came here. How many men can he muster? Elena asked. In Stillwater, probably a dozen. Out here, Caleb gestured to the empty country beyond the windows. He has connections. Could bring in hired guns from El Paso or Santa Fe. We have to assume we will be outnumbered. Then we need to be smarter. Sarah surprised them both by speaking up. My father is confident because he is used to people being afraid of him. He will expect you to run or hide. He will not expect you to go on the offensive. You have your mother's mind, Caleb said with a slight smile, and my father's ruthlessness when I need it. They were still planning when Elena heard the horses. Caleb heard them too. His hand went to his gun, and he moved to the window in one fluid motion. His face went hard. 6 riders, coming fast. They are armed. Already, Sarah's face had gone pale. Your father does not waste time. Caleb started moving through the house with quick efficiency, checking weapons, closing shutters. Elena, can you shoot? I do not know. I have never tried. Then you are about to learn. He handed her a rifle from a rack near the door. Point at what you want to hit, squeeze the trigger slow and steady. And remember, if they get inside this house, they will kill all of us. The riders were close now. Elena could hear the thunder of hooves, the jangle of tack. Her hands shook as she held the rifle, the weight of it foreign and terrifying. Caleb positioned her near a window with a good view of the approach, then moved to the opposite side of the room. Sarah he put in the back bedroom with a pistol and instructions to shoot anyone who came through the door who was not him or Elena. If this goes wrong, he said quietly, "There is a horse saddled in the barn. Take it and ride north to Fort Griffin. Ask for Colonel Morrison. Tell him Caleb Rowan sent you and that you need protection. He owes me a favor." "It will not go wrong," Helena said with more confidence than she felt. Caleb almost smiled. "Let us hope you are right." The riders stopped about 50 yards from the house, just beyond easy rifle range. One of them, a big man with a scar across his face, called out, "Rowan, we know you are in there. Send out the girl and the woman, and we will leave you in peace." "No deal," Caleb shouted back. "Turn around and ride out, and I will not shoot you." The scarred man laughed. "Boss said you would be difficult. Said you used to be someone to fear, but that was years ago. You are just an old man now hiding in a falling-down ranch with 2 women who cannot protect themselves. Then come and take them. See how that works out for you." There was a pause. Helena could see the riders conferring, making decisions. Then 4 of them dismounted and began to spread out, moving to flank the house from different angles. "They are going to try to pin us down," Caleb said. "When I start shooting you, pick a target and fire. Do not worry about hitting them at first, just make them keep their heads down." "Understood?" Helena nodded, though her heart was hammering so hard she could barely hear over it. The first shot came from one of the riders testing. The bullet thudded into the wooden wall near Elena's window. She flinched, but held her position. Caleb returned fire, his shot precise and measured. One of the riders staggered and went down, clutching his leg. Then it was chaos. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions, bullets punching through the wooden walls and shutters. Elena raised the rifle, sighted down the barrel at a man running between cover, and pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed into her injured shoulder, making her gasp. Her shot went wide, kicking up dirt 10 feet from her target. But the man dove for cover anyway, and that was something. She worked the lever action, chambered another round, and fired again. This time she led the target more, and the bullet caught the edge of the water trough he was hiding behind. Splinters flew. The man cursed loud enough for her to hear. "Good," Caleb called. "Keep them honest." For 10 minutes, that felt like hours, they traded shots with the attackers. Caleb moved between windows with practiced efficiency, placing his shots with care, making every bullet count. Elena fired when she saw movement, slowly getting a feel for the rifle's rhythm, learning to anticipate the kick. One of the attackers tried to rush the back door. Sarah's pistol barked twice, and the man fell back with a scream. When he crawled away, there was blood on his shirt. "Nice shooting," Caleb yelled to the back room. "He should not have underestimated me," Sarah called back, and there was steel in her voice that had not been there before. But they were running low on ammunition, and the attackers knew it. They had pulled back to better cover and were maintaining steady fire, trying to wear down the defenders. Sooner or later, someone would try another rush, and if they came from multiple directions at once, there was no way to stop them all. Elena was reaching for another cartridge when she saw movement at the barn. One of the riders had circled wide and was trying to set fire to it. If the barn burned, they would lose the horses. They would be trapped. She did not think. She stood, stepped out onto the porch, raised the rifle, and fired from a completely exposed position. The bullet caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around. He dropped the torch and stumbled backward, clutching the wound. Then return fire erupted from 3 directions at once, all aimed at Elena. She dove back inside as bullets chewed apart the doorframe where she had been standing. Splinters flew. She hit the floor hard, driving the air from her injured ribs, and lay there gasping. Caleb was beside her in seconds. "Are you hit?" "No, just stupid." "Stupid and effective." You stopped him. He helped her sit up against the wall. "But do not do that again." "I will try to remember that." Outside, the gunfire had stopped. Elena could hear voices conferring, then the sound of horses moving. She risked a look through the shattered door. The riders were retreating, 2 of them, helping the wounded, onto horses. The scarred man looked back at the house, his face twisted with rage, and shouted one final message. "This is not over, Rowan. The boss is coming himself, with more men. And next time there will be no warning." Then they were gone, riding hard back toward Stillwater, leaving 2 trails of blood in the dust. The silence after they left was deafening. Elena sagged against the wall, the rifle falling from her shaking hands. Her whole body was trembling now, adrenaline draining away, and leaving nothing but exhaustion and the sick realization of what she had just done. She had shot a man, maybe killed him. She had taken aim at another human being and pulled the trigger without hesitation, and the worst part was how easy it had been. Caleb checked the perimeter, making sure the riders were really gone, then came back to find Elena sitting on the floor with her head in her hands. He did not say anything, just sat down beside her and waited. "Does it ever stop?" she asked finally. "The shaking?" "No, and that is good. It means you are still human." "I do not feel human. I feel like something broke inside me." "Nothing broke. Something woke up." His voice was gentle. "You did what you had to do to survive. To protect people who needed protecting. That is not wrong, Elena." "Then why does it feel like it is?" "Because you have a conscience. Because you understand the weight of what you just did." He stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, let us make sure Sarah is all right, and then we need to talk about what comes next." Sarah emerged from the back room, pale but steady. She had the look of someone who had just crossed a threshold they could not uncross. Elena recognized it because she felt the same way. They gathered around the kitchen table, and for a long moment, nobody spoke. Finally, Caleb broke the silence. "They will be back, with more men like he said. We probably have 2 days at most before Voss comes with enough force to overrun us." He looked at both women. "So we have a choice. We can run, try to get to safety before he finds us. Or we can do what Sarah suggested. Go on the offensive. Head to Devil's Cradle, get the evidence, and end this before he can regroup." "If we run, he wins," Sarah said quietly. "My mother dies unavenged, and I spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder." "If we fight, we might all die," Caleb countered. "We might die running too." Elena surprised herself by speaking up. "At least if we fight, we die for something that matters." Caleb studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we leave at first light. Pack light, ride fast. 3 days to Devil's Cradle, 1 day to find what we need 3 days back. If we are lucky, we can get to the federal marshal in Austin before Voss even knows we have been gone." "And if we are not lucky?" Sarah asked. "Then we make our stand at the mine. Better ground, easier to defend." His expression was grim. "Either way, this ends one way or another within the week." They spent the evening preparing. Caleb checked weapons and ammunition, packed supplies for the journey. Sarah helped Elena into the clean dress, then carefully rewrapped her ribs with fresh bandages. The work was practical, necessary, and it kept them from thinking too much about what they were riding toward. As darkness fell, they sat together on the porch watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast Texas sky. The air had cooled, bringing relief from the day's heat. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called its voice lonely and wild. "Tell me about my mother," Sarah said suddenly. "What she was like before my father, before everything went wrong." Caleb was quiet for a moment, reaching back for memories. "I only knew her briefly, one afternoon at a lawyer's office, but I remember she laughed a lot. Real laughter, not the polite kind. And she was curious about everything, asked me 100 questions about Kansas, about what it was like growing up there. She made me feel like my life mattered, like my stories were worth hearing." He paused. "She had kindness in her. The real kind, not the performative kind. You could see it in how she talked about people." "She used to read to me," Sarah said softly. "Poetry mostly, Wordsworth and Keats. She said beautiful words were important because the world was often ugly and we needed to remember that beauty existed too." Elena listened to them share memories of a woman she should have known, should have loved, and felt the ache of all that lost time. Grace Hartwell had trusted her with secrets and with her daughter's safety, and Elena had forgotten it all, had let those memories burn away like so much smoke. But she was remembering now, not the details, not the specific moments, but something deeper, a sense of who Catherine had been, what she had stood for. Catherine had been brave, had stood up to a monster even knowing the cost, had made promises she intended to keep. And maybe Elena did not remember being Catherine. But she could finish what Catherine started. "I am scared," Sarah admitted into the darkness. "Good," Caleb said. "Fear keeps you alive. It is only dangerous when you let it control you. What if we fail? What if we get to the mine and there is nothing there? Then we tried, and trying matters. Elena reached over and took Sarah's hand. The young woman's fingers were cold despite the lingering heat. "We will not fail," Elena said with more certainty than she felt. "Your mother did not raise a coward, and she did not trust a woman who would give up when things got hard." Sarah squeezed her hand tightly. "Thank you for doing this, for risking your life for people you do not even remember. Maybe I do not remember you, but I know you matter, and that is enough." They sat in silence after that, three people bound together by violence and loss and the fragile hope that justice might still be possible in a world that often seemed devoid of it. Eventually Caleb stood. "We should sleep. Tomorrow will be hard and the days after harder still. Rest while you can." He went inside, leaving Elena and Sarah alone under the stars. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "Of course. Do you think my mother suffered when she died?" Elena thought about lying, about offering comfort, but Sarah deserved truth. "I do not know. I wish I could tell you she did not, but I do not remember. I dream about it sometimes, about what her last moments were like, if she was afraid, if she called for me." Tears slid down Sarah's face. "I was in the house that night, upstairs. I heard them arguing, heard her scream, but I was too afraid to go down, too afraid of what my father would do, and by the time I worked up the courage, the house was on fire, and she was already gone. You were a child. There was nothing you could have done. I could have tried, like Catherine tried." Sarah wiped at her eyes. "I have been a coward my whole life, but not anymore. Whatever happens at Devil's Cradle, I will not hide this time. I will stand and fight. For her. Then we stand together." They went inside, each to their separate rooms, to try to sleep before the hard days ahead. Elena lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling, and thought about courage, about how it was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it, about how Catherine had been brave enough to stand against Clayton Voss, and how Elena had to be brave enough to finish the fight. Tomorrow they would ride toward answers, toward truth, toward a reckoning 2 years in the making, and when they got there one way or another, the forgetting would end. The past would have its day, the dead would have their justice, and Elena would finally know who she had been and what that woman had died trying to protect. She closed her eyes and drifted toward sleep, and in her dreams she smelled smoke and heard a woman's voice calling a name she almost remembered. "Catherine, come back. It is not too late." But it was too late. It had been too late since the moment the first match struck. All that was left now was to make the burning mean something. Dawn came cold and merciless, the way it always did in West Texas. The sky bled from black to bruised purple to pale gold, and with the light came the certainty that there was no turning back. Elena stood in the yard, watching Caleb saddle the horses with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times. Her ribs still ached. With every breath her face still bore the purple and yellow marks of Voss's fists, but her hands were steady as she checked the rifle he had given her. Strange how quickly violence became familiar, how easily the body learned to prepare for war. Sarah emerged from the house carrying saddlebags packed with food and water for the journey. She had changed into riding clothes, practical canvas and leather that would survive the hard country ahead. Her face was pale but determined, and Elena recognized that look. It was the expression of someone who had spent too long being afraid and had finally decided that death was preferable to another day of cowardice. Before mounting, Sarah pulled a folded newspaper from her saddlebag, her fingers trembling slightly as she handed it to Caleb. "There is something else you should know. Dr. Pritchard's nephew Thomas has been asking questions in town about his uncle's death. Dangerous questions." She paused. "I heard from the cook that he took work as one of my father's hired guns 2 months ago." Caleb's eyes sharpened. "Infiltrating. Or a boy looking to get himself killed," Elena said quietly. "Perhaps both." Caleb folded the newspaper and tucked it into his coat. "If he is smart, he will stay clear of this. If he is loyal to his uncle's memory, he might do something stupid at exactly the right moment." "Can we trust him?" Sarah asked. "We cannot trust anyone," Caleb replied. "But we can hope." 3 days, Caleb said, cinching the final strap on his bay gelding. "If we push hard and the weather holds. Devil's Cradle is rough country. Not many people go there anymore. Too remote, too dangerous, which is probably why Grace chose it. What do we do when we get there? Sarah asked. Find the mine. Find the deed. Get out before Voss finds us. Caleb swung into his saddle. Simple as that. Nothing about this is simple, Elena said, mounting her own horse with movements that made her ribs scream protest. No, Caleb agreed. But simple is all we have got. They rode out as the sun cleared the horizon, 3 figures against the vast emptiness of Texas, heading west toward answers that might kill them all. The first day passed in hard riding and harder silence. The landscape changed around them, the scrub grass giving way to rockier ground, the hills rising like the bones of the earth pushing through thin skin. They saw no one. This was country too poor for ranching, too dry for farming, claimed only by rattlesnakes and scorpions, and the occasional buzzard circling something that had given up the fight. Elena found herself falling into the rhythm of the ride, her body remembering things her mind did not. How to sit a horse for hours without cramping, how to read the land for water signs, how to move through country that did not want you there. These were Catherine's skills surfacing through the fog of forgetting, like fish breaking the surface of dark water. They stopped briefly at midday to rest the horses and eat jerky and hardtack that tasted like sadness. Sarah sat apart from them, staring west toward the hills that hid Devil's Cradle, her face unreadable. She is holding up well, Caleb said quietly to Elena. She is her mother's daughter. And her father's. That is what worries me. Voss did not get where he is by being stupid or weak. Sarah has that same steel. The question is what she will do with it when we find what we are looking for. Elena understood what he was not saying. Vengeance and justice wore similar faces sometimes. The line between them was thin as a blade's edge and easy to cross without noticing. We keep her from crossing that line, Elena said. Can anyone? Caleb's gray eyes were distant. I have spent 6 months chasing my sister's killer. Part of me wants to put a bullet in Voss and call it done. The only thing stopping me is knowing Grace would not want that. She believed in law, in proper justice. But believing in something does not make it real. Then we make it real. We get the evidence, we bring it to the federal marshal, and we let the system work the way it is supposed to. You have more faith in the system than I do. I do not have faith in anything, Elena said. But I have hope, and sometimes that is enough. They rode on through the afternoon heat, the sun beating down like a hammer on an anvil, forging them into something harder with each mile. By the time they made camp that evening in a hollow sheltered by red rocks, all 3 of them were exhausted and sunburned and too tired for conversation. Caleb built a small fire, just enough to boil coffee and warm beans. They ate in silence, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Out here, away from town lights, the Milky Way stretched across the heavens like a river of light so bright it cast shadows. Do you think she is watching? Sarah asked suddenly. My mother. Do you think the dead can see us? I do not know, Caleb said. I hope not. I would hate for Grace to see how long it has taken me to find the truth. She would understand. She always understood when people were trying. Sarah wrapped her arms around her knees. I used to talk to her after she died. I would go to her grave and tell her about my day, about what I was reading, about how much I hated my father. The priest said it was unhealthy talking to the dead, but it made me feel less alone. It is not unhealthy, Elena said. The dead do not leave us just because they stop breathing. They live in our memories, in our choices, in the promises we keep. Sarah looked at her with something like gratitude. You sound like her, like my mother. She used to say things like that. Elena felt a strange warmth in her chest. Maybe she did not remember Grace, but some part of Catherine did. Some part of the woman she had been still lived in the things she said, the way she thought. Memory was not just what you could recall. It was who you became because of what you had lived. They took turns on watch that night, 2 sleeping, while one kept guard against threats, both human and animal. When Elena's turn came in the small hours before dawn, she sat with the rifle across her knees and watched the darkness, thinking about all the versions of herself that existed in the spaces between remembering and forgetting. Catherine, who had been brave enough to stand against a monster. Elena, who had built a quiet life from the ashes of forgetting. And whoever she was becoming now riding toward a confrontation that would define everything that came after. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggle, and Elena wondered if that was a comfort or a curse. To know that the universe did not care whether you lived or died, whether you found justice or fell into dust. There was a kind of freedom in that indifference. It meant your choices were your own. No cosmic plan, no predetermined fate. Just the daily decision to keep fighting or to give up. She chose fighting, not because she was brave, but because the alternative was unthinkable. Dawn came again, and they rode on. The second day was harder. The terrain grew rougher, the trail less certain. They had to dismount frequently to lead the horses over broken ground, and twice they had to backtrack when the path disappeared into impassable rock falls. The heat was brutal, and their water was running low. By afternoon, all three of them were moving with the mechanical determination of people past exhaustion, held together only by will. It was Sarah who saw it first. A thin line of green in the distance, the impossible color of life in this wasteland. "There," she said, pointing. "That has to be it, Devil's Cradle." They pushed on, and as they drew closer the landscape revealed itself. A canyon cut deep into the hills, its walls striped red and white and ochre, carved by water that had not flowed here in 1,000 years, and at the bottom, fed by some underground spring, a thin ribbon of vegetation. Cottonwoods and willows clinging to existence in the shadow of stone. And mines. Dozens of them, dark openings in the canyon walls, like empty eye sockets staring out at nothing. "Which one?" Caleb asked, scanning the cliff face. Sarah pulled out her mother's map, comparing it to the landscape. Her finger traced the route, then pointed to a mine entrance about halfway up the eastern wall, accessible by a narrow path that switchbacked up the rock. "That one. The map shows a specific rock formation. See that outcropping that looks like a broken tooth? The mine is just below it." They made their way down into the canyon carefully, the horses picking their way over loose scree. At the bottom they found the remains of an old mining camp, collapsed buildings, rusted equipment, the bones of wagons that would never move again. This had been a busy place, once full of men chasing silver dreams. Now it was a graveyard. They tied the horses near the water and climbed the path on foot. It was steep and treacherous, the rock crumbling under their boots, and Elena's ribs protested every step. But she kept climbing, driven by something deeper than pain. The mine entrance was exactly where the map said it would be. A wooden frame, rotted but still standing, led into darkness. Caleb lit the lantern he had brought and led the way inside. The tunnel stretched back into the mountain, shored up with timbers that creaked ominously as they passed. The air was cool and damp, smelling of stone and time. Their footsteps echoed strangely, and somewhere in the darkness water dripped with patient rhythm. They walked for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, following the tunnel as it branched and turned. Sarah navigated by memory of her mother's map, calling out directions, left at the fork. Straight past the collapsed section, down when the tunnel splits. And then they were there. A wider chamber, natural rather than man, made its walls glittering with quartz veins, and in the center, protected by a cairn of stones, a small iron box. Caleb lifted it carefully, as if it might dissolve at rough handling. The lock had rusted through. He pried it open with his knife. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were documents. The deed to the mine in Grace Hartwell's name. Financial records showing 2 years of theft from the trust. And letters. Grace's handwriting documenting every instance of violence, every threat, every crime Clayton Voss had committed. And beneath it all, another journal, smaller than Grace's, bound in cracked leather. Elena took it with trembling hands and opened to the first page. The handwriting was hers, Catherine's. The words hit her like fists. "My name is Catherine Eleanor Mercer. I am writing this in case I do not survive to tell the truth myself. I was not always a good person. I have made mistakes, but I am trying to make them right." She turned the pages, reading quickly, and the story unfolded like a flower made of thorns. Catherine had worked for an investment company in New Orleans. Respectable work for a woman with education, but no family money. She had been good at her job. Too good. Good enough to notice when the numbers did not add up. When client funds disappeared into private accounts. when lies were told to hide theft on a massive scale. The company had defrauded dozens of families, stolen their savings, their futures, their hopes. And when Catherine discovered it, she had two choices: look away and keep her position, or do something about it. She chose truth. She copied the ledgers, gathered evidence, prepared to go to the authorities. But the company discovered her plans before she could act. They sent men. Men who did not ask questions or accept explanations. Men who killed problems. Catherine ran. She took the evidence and she ran. And the company's men followed. She made it as far as Grace Hartwell's boarding house, where Grace was working to support herself after her father lost everything to the same investment fraud that Catherine was trying to expose. They had become friends, Catherine hiding Grace, protecting her. And when Grace's mother forced her daughter to marry Clayton Voss and moved to Texas, Catherine went with her. A new name, a new start, or so they thought, but Voss had been part of it, part of the fraud, part of the network of lies. He had married Grace specifically for the mine for the silver that could fund his ambitions. And when he realized Catherine knew the truth about his past, knew what he had done, he could not let her live. The fire had been meant to kill them both. Catherine and Grace, the two women who knew too much. It had succeeded with one. It had only thought it succeeded with the other. Elena closed the journal, her hands shaking so hard she nearly dropped it. She looked up to find Caleb and Sarah staring at her. "I was not innocent," she said, her voice breaking. "I was not just some victim who got caught in the crossfire. I brought the danger to Grace. I got her killed." "You tried to expose criminals," Caleb said firmly. "That is not a crime." "But I failed. I ran instead of finishing what I started, and Grace paid for my cowardice. You were being hunted by killers. You did what anyone would do. You survived." Sarah's voice was gentle. "My mother knew what she was risking by helping you. She chose to do it anyway. That was her decision, not your fault. She trusted me to protect her," Elena whispered, "and I could not even remember her name." "Then protect her now." Sarah took Elena's hands. "Finish what you started. What she died trying to help you do. Make Voss answer for all of it. The fraud, the murder, everything." Elena looked down at the documents in the box. Evidence of crimes spanning years. Proof that could destroy Clayton Voss and everyone connected to him. This was what Catherine had been trying to accomplish. What Grace had died protecting. The weight of it was crushing. But it was also clarifying. She finally knew who she was. Not just Elena, not just Catherine, but the woman who carried both their stories and had to decide what to do with that knowledge. Elena knelt to gather the documents, her fingers brushing the financial ledgers. A name caught her eye. A signature she had seen before in the New Orleans company files from her recovered memories. Her blood went cold. "Caleb," she said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, "look at this." She held up a contract dated 1867, Clayton Voss's signature bold and arrogant. But beneath it, a title: Chief Enforcement Officer, Continental Investment Group. He was not just part of the fraud. Elena said, the pieces finally clicking together in her mind. He was their enforcer, the man they sent when someone needed to disappear. Sarah's face had gone white. "What are you saying?" "I am saying your father did not just marry your mother for her money. He was sent to marry her. The investment company that defrauded her family, they paid Voss to get close to Grace, to control the mine, to eliminate anyone who threatened to expose them." Elena's hands were shaking. "The 3 people who died in New Orleans before I escaped, I thought it was random violence. It was him. It was always him." "Then my mother never had a chance," Sarah whispered. "From the moment he proposed, she was already dead." She was reaching for the deed when she heard the voice from the tunnel entrance. "I have to admire your persistence, Rowan. I really do." Clayton Voss stepped into the chamber, a pistol in each hand, and behind him came 6 armed men. They had been followed, or worse, anticipated. Voss had known they would come here, had been waiting. Elena's hand went to her rifle, but Voss was faster. "I would not. My men have their guns on all of you. First person to move dies. And I am rather hoping it will be you, Catherine. I owe you a death. 2 years overdue." Caleb had gone very still, the kind of stillness that came before violence. But he did not draw. Not with 6 guns aimed at them. "How did you know we would be here?" he asked. Sarah, darling, you were never as clever as you thought." Voss smiled at his daughter with something that might have been affection in a man capable of feeling it. "I have been watching you for months. Knew you would run eventually. Knew you would come to the mine. You are predictable, just like your mother." "Do not speak about her," Sarah said through clenched teeth. "Why not I speak about my property however I wish? And she was mine. The mine is mine. And soon everything she tried to hide from me will be mine as well." He gestured with one gun toward the iron box. "Hand it over. The deed, the documents, all of it." "And if we refuse?" Elena asked. "Then I kill you here and take it anyway. Your choice." Elena looked at Caleb, at Sarah, at the 6 hired guns blocking the only exit. They were trapped, outgunned, out of options, except for one. She picked up the iron box and walked toward Voss, her movements slow, yet slow and deliberate. Every eye in the chamber was on her. She could feel Caleb's tension, Sarah's fear, Voss's triumph. She stopped 10 feet from him and held out the box. "You win," she said. "Take it." Voss reached for it, greed bright in his eyes. Elena threw it at his feet. The box hit the stone and burst open, documents scattering, and in that moment of distraction, several things happened at once. Caleb drew and fired, hitting one of the gunmen in the shoulder. Sarah dove for cover behind a rock formation, pulling a pistol Elena had not known she was carrying. And the youngest of Voss's men, a young man in his mid-20s, turned his gun away from the prisoners and toward his employer. The shot caught Voss in the shoulder, spinning him around. His own guns went off, bullets ricocheting wildly off stone walls. Then chaos erupted. Gunfire filled the chamber, deafening in the enclosed space. Elena dropped flat, scrambling for the rifle she had left near the wall. Bullets chewed up rock above her head. Dust and gun smoke filled the air. She reached the rifle, rolled onto her back, and fired at the nearest gunman. The recoil drove into her injured ribs, and she gasped, but the shot was true. The man went down. Caleb was fighting like a man with nothing to lose, his revolver barking steadily. 2 more of Voss's men fell. The remaining ones were caught between Caleb's precision and Sarah's surprising competence with her pistol, and the betrayal from their own ranks. It was over in less than a minute. 4 of Voss's men were down. 1 had fled back up the tunnel, and Voss himself knelt on the stone floor, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his face twisted with rage and pain. The young man who had shot him stood with his gun still trained on his former employer, his hands shaking, but his aim steady. "My name is Thomas Pritchard," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "My uncle was Dr. Samuel Pritchard, the man you poisoned 6 months ago because he threatened to tell the truth about what you did." Voss spat blood. "Your uncle was a fool who did not know when to keep his mouth shut. He was a good man who saved a woman's life, and you killed him for it." Thomas's finger tightened on the trigger. "Give me one reason I should not end you right here." "Because we need him alive," Caleb said, stepping forward. "We need him to stand trial, to answer for everything he has done. If you kill him, he becomes a martyr. Let him live to face justice." "There is no justice," Thomas said bitterly. "Not for men like him. He will buy his way out. He always does." "Not this time," Sarah said. She had gathered the scattered documents, was holding them up. "Not with this evidence. Not with all of us willing to testify." Elena moved to stand beside Voss, looking down at the man who had beaten her, who had killed Grace, who had poisoned a doctor and tried to murder her twice. He looked smaller now, diminished, a bully stripped of his power. "You should have stayed dead," he said to her, his voice thick with pain and hatred. "Probably," Elena agreed, "but I did not. And now you have to live with that." She turned to Thomas. "Lower the gun. Please, do not let him make you into a killer. That is what he wants. To drag you down to his level." For a long moment, Thomas did not move. Then slowly he lowered the weapon. "For my uncle," he said, "not for him." Caleb moved quickly, disarming Voss and binding his hands with rope from his pack. The man was cursing, threatening, promising revenge and ruin, but his words had no weight anymore. He was finished, and he knew it. They gathered the documents carefully, made sure nothing was lost in the chaos. The deed to the mine, the financial records, Grace's letters, Catherine's journal. Evidence of crimes spanning years. Enough to put Voss away for the rest of his life. if they could get it to the authorities before Voss's remaining allies found them. "We need to move," Caleb said. "That gunman who ran will bring reinforcements. We have maybe a few hours' head start." They made their way back up the tunnel, Voss stumbling ahead of them at gunpoint. Thomas had joined them, his loyalty shifted by grief and the need for his uncle's death to mean something. At the entrance, Elena paused and looked back into the darkness. Somewhere in there, 2 years ago, Catherine had hidden the truth, and now Elena had found it. The circle was closing. The story was reaching its end. She just hoped they would live to see how it finished. The ride back was hard and fast, pushing the horses to their limits. They could not stop for more than a few minutes at a time, could not risk Voss's reinforcements catching them in open country. Sarah rode with grim determination, Thomas with the haunted look of a man who had crossed a line he could not uncross, and Voss, bound and bleeding, cursed them every mile. By the time they reached the outskirts of Austin 3 days later, they were all exhausted, filthy, and running on nothing but will. The federal marshal's office was a 2-story building on Congress Avenue. Caleb dismounted and helped Elena down, then dragged Voss from his horse with less gentleness than necessary. Marshal William Harrison was a lean man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen too much to be easily shocked. But when they laid out the evidence on his desk, when they told the story of Grace Hartwell's murder and the conspiracy that had led to it, something shifted in his expression. "This is substantial," he said, leafing through the documents. "If even half of this is verifiable, Voss is looking at 20 years minimum, probably more." "It is all verifiable," Sarah said. "My mother kept meticulous records." Harrison looked at her with something like respect. "You are Grace's daughter." "I am. She would be proud of you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she kept her composure. "Thank you, sir. That means more than you know." The trial took 3 months. 3 months of testimony and evidence, and lawyers trying to punch holes in their story. But the truth was too solid, too well documented. Voss's money could buy good attorneys, but it could not erase what he had done. The verdict came on a cold December morning. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, theft, attempted murder. The judge sentenced him to 20 years in the territorial prison with all assets seized to pay restitution to his victims. Elena sat in the courtroom gallery watching as they led Clayton Voss away in chains and felt nothing, no triumph, no relief. Just emptiness where fear used to live. Outside the courthouse, Sarah found her. "It is over," the young woman said, and she was smiling through tears. "It is really over." "It is," Elena agreed. "What will you do now?" "My mother's assets have been returned to me. The mine, the trust, everything. I am going to use it the way she would have wanted, to help people. I am thinking a foundation for women fleeing violence, a place where they can heal and learn and start over." She looked at Elena. "I want to name it after her, the Grace Hartwell Foundation. What do you think?" "I think she would love that. And I want you to help me run it, you and Mr. Rowan, if you are willing." Elena looked across the street to where Caleb stood talking with the marshal, his hat pushed back, his face relaxed in a way she had never seen before. The weight of 6 months of investigation was gone. His sister had justice. The truth had won. "I think we would be honored," Elena said. They built it together over the next year, not in Texas, where the memories were too fresh, but in New Mexico, a ranch that became a refuge, a place where women who had been broken by violence could come to heal, to learn skills, to rebuild their lives from the ashes of what they had survived. Elena taught them to sew and read and shoot, depending on what they needed. Sarah taught literature and art and the importance of beauty in a harsh world. Caleb taught them self-defense and how to recognize danger before it found them, and slowly the place became what its founders needed it to be. Not just a refuge, but a home. Not just a shelter, but a community. Elena and Caleb did not marry right away. There was too much healing to do, too much past to integrate. But they built something steadier than romance: partnership, understanding, the kind of love that comes from shared trauma and the decision to keep choosing each other despite it. The first year was the hardest. They found land in New Mexico, built the main house with their own hands. Sarah threw herself into the work with fierce determination, as if building something could fill the hole her mother's death had left. Thomas Pritchard stayed with them for 6 months, helping construct the bunkhouses and barn. He was quieter than before, haunted by what he had done in the mine. One morning, Elena found him packing his belongings. "I need to go," he said simply. "See if I can outrun what I did." "You saved our lives," she told him. "I killed a man, justified or not, that changes you." He looked at her with eyes older than his years. "My uncle saved you by helping you forget. Maybe I need to forget too." She did not try to stop him. Everyone healed differently. The women came slowly at first, 1 or 2 at a time, referred by sympathetic sheriffs or doctors who knew what Sarah was building. Women with bruises hidden under long sleeves. Women who flinched at raised voices. Women who had forgotten what safety felt like. Elena taught them practical skills: sewing, reading, how to handle a rifle. But more importantly, she taught them what Dr. Pritchard had taught her, that you could survive losing yourself and still become someone worth being. Caleb taught them to recognize danger, the signs of a man who would hurt you, how to trust your instincts, how to leave before it was too late. And Sarah, sweet Sarah, who had spent 2 years trapped in her father's house, taught them literature and art and the revolutionary idea that women deserved beauty in their lives. The foundation grew. By the end of the first year, they had helped 16 women. By the end of the second, 43. Elena and Caleb's relationship developed slowly, carefully. They were both too damaged for grand romance. But they found something steadier: companionship built on shared purpose. Love that grew from mutual respect rather than passion. One night, 8 months after the trial, Caleb found her sitting alone in the barn. "Cannot sleep?" he asked. "Too many memories. The good ones are almost harder than the bad ones." She looked at him. "I remember Grace now, not everything but enough. She used to sing when she cooked, badly, off-key, but it made people smile." Caleb sat beside her in the hay. "She would like what you are building here, what we are building." "I hope so." Elena leaned against him, fitting naturally into the space at his shoulder. "Caleb, do you think we will ever stop feeling guilty for surviving when they did not?" "No. But maybe we can make our survival mean something, make their deaths count for something." His arm came around her. "That is all any of us can do." They sat together in comfortable silence, and Elena realized this was what healing looked like. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. One evening, almost 2 years after the trial, Elena stood on the hill above the ranch and watched the sunset over the New Mexico desert. The sky was on fire. Orange and pink and purple bleeding together in ways that made her chest ache with their beauty. Caleb came to stand beside her, his presence solid and warm in the cooling air. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. Elena was quiet for a long moment, watching the light change. "I am thinking about who I am, Catherine." "Elena, both." "Neither. I spent so long trying to remember, and now I have all the memories back, and I am not sure they matter as much as I thought they would." "What matters then?" "This, now. The choices I make tomorrow." She turned to look at him. Catherine made mistakes, ran when she should have fought, but she also tried to do the right thing even knowing the cost. And Elena, she survived when survival should have been impossible. Both of them are part of me, but neither of them defines me. "Who does define you?" "I do, every day, with every choice." She smiled. "That is the gift the forgetting gave me. The chance to decide who I wanted to be instead of being trapped by who I had been." Caleb took her hand, his fingers warm against hers. "And who do you want to be? Someone who helps people, someone who stands up when others look away, someone who believes that justice is possible even when the world says it is not." She leaned against him. "Someone who loves you. If you will have her." "I will have her every day for the rest of my life." They stood together as the sun sank below the horizon and the stars began to emerge. Behind them the ranch was coming alive with evening sounds, voices calling laughter from the dining hall, the whinny of horses settling for the night. Home, Elena thought. This is home. Not because of the place, but because of the people, because of the choice to stop running and start building. Down the hill, Sarah emerged from the main house, waving up at them. New arrivals, probably, women who needed shelter and strength and the knowledge that they were not alone. Elena waved back and started down the hill, Caleb beside her. There was work to do. There was always work to do. But that was all right. The work was what made life meaningful. She had been beaten and broken and left for dead. She had lost her memory and her name, and everything she thought defined her. She had been Catherine. She had been Elena. She had been the woman with no past and the woman haunted by it. Now she was just herself, whoever that was, whoever that would become. And that, she thought as she walked toward the house and the women waiting there, was enough, more than enough. It was everything. The desert remembered, the stars remembered, and the dead remembered in the hearts of those who kept fighting in their names. But the living got to choose what came next, and Elena chose hope.